Are you ready for the twist? Vanderpump Rules has tried to hide for over a decade? Because the real truth about this show isn't in the friendships, the breakups, or even the scandals. It's in the people the cast hated the most, the ones they dismissed, dragged, and labeled crazy, messy, or toxic. Here's the shocker. The villains weren't wrong. They were early. And once you start connecting the dots, it's impossible to unsee. Kristen warning everyone about Sandoval years before Sandoval exploded? Jax predicting marriages that would crumble exactly the way they did? Lala calling Rachel's meltdown seasons before it happened? Shiana diagnosing Tom's narcissism long before Ariana ever used the word? These weren't accidents. These weren't tantrums. These were premature truths, coming from the last people anyone wanted to hear them from. Meanwhile, the so-called heroes, Ariana, Katie, even James, were busy defending the very behavior that would later destroy them, protecting their partners, protecting their egos, protecting the narrative. And that's the wild part. The cast didn't ignore the villains because they were wrong. They ignored them because they were right too soon. Today, we're breaking down the receipts, the moments, and the messy prophecies that aged like fine wine, and exposing how Vanderpump's most chaotic personalities ended up being the show's accidental truth-tellers. Let's get into it, because once you hear this, the entire series looks completely different. Ariana Madix now enjoys the glow of post-Sandoval sainthood, but a glance at her earlier seasons reveals a far less flattering portrait, one built on defensiveness, selective outrage, and an unshakable commitment to propping up Tom Sandoval's mythology. The transformation narrative is pleasant, of course, but it requires ignoring the fact that she once made a full-time sport out of dismissing and belittling other women whose concerns turned out to be entirely correct. Consider the Kristen and Miami Girl debacle. Ariana didn't simply stand by Sandoval, she ran quality control for his image. The gaslighting was a joint venture, loyalty to the sexy boy who validated her, and a desire to maintain the coveted title of cool girl. It was far easier to treat Kristen as the perennial hysteric and a random woman as an inconvenience than to confront the obvious. Protecting Sandoval meant protecting her own ego. Admitting the truth would have meant acknowledging that Kristen was right, that Sandoval was predictable, and that Ariana herself wasn't the exception she desperately wanted to be. This pattern resurfaced with Raquel. While Katie voiced legitimate boundaries, Ariana beamed with pride at Raquel finding her voice, a touching sentiment that evaporated the moment Raquel's choices finally affected her. Ariana's moral compass has always been reliable, provided it doesn't interfere with her alliances. The popular claim that she has grown since then sounds persuasive, until one asks the inconvenient question, grown according to whom? Public image is a powerful sculptor, and Ariana has long displayed an uncanny ability to maintain composure, control the narrative, and appear reasonable next to a cast that specializes in self-immolation. That may be growth, or it may simply be good media training. Without the unfiltered chaos of ongoing filming, certainty is impossible. Still, even with the contradictions, she remains one of the few cast members, alongside Kristen and Katie, who appear capable of learning from past behavior. That alone sets them apart in a group otherwise committed to recycling the same mistakes for sport. Yet the record remains, Ariana protected Sandoval not out of principle, but out of self-preservation, resurrecting old wounds only when they fit the storyline of the scorned woman. Evolution is admirable, but pretending the earlier chapters didn't happen is unnecessary. Her past doesn't negate her present, but it does make the hero edit far more complicated than the myth suggests. Here's the uncomfortable truth about Jax and Kristen that the cast pretends not to notice. Jax Taylor's most enduring love story may never have involved a romantic partner at all. It has always orbited, with suspicious consistency, around Kristen doubt. Whenever Kristen moves forward, new boyfriend, new ambition, new attempt at adulthood, Jax unravels with theatrical indignation, as though her progress is a personal affront. The pattern is so blatant, it practically demands its own Chiron. His fixation isn't the garden-variety meddling of a longtime friend. It carries the unmistakable tang of possessiveness. Kristen begins trying for a baby with a new partner, and Jax behaves as though she's betrayed him. Kristen dates James years earlier, and Jax reacts with disproportionate fury, ostensibly because James steals attention, but more realistically because Kristen dared to redirect her energy towards someone who wasn't Jax Taylor. The man does not handle a shift in gravitational pull well. This odd attachment isn't easily filed under romantic love. It's something more tangled, a long-standing, mutually toxic bond forged through similar temperaments, too much shared wreckage, and the kind of familiarity that breeds both loyalty and resentment. They understand one another's worst impulses because they've both lived in that same emotional neighborhood. Strip away the infamous hookup, and the dynamic resembles a pair of siblings who know exactly where to stick the knife and exactly how to offer a warped kind of protection. Some insist Kristen carries genuine, wholehearted affection for Jax, perhaps the only form of love he has ever inspired that doesn't hinge on performance or bravado. Her reactions at reunions suggest a woman who feels personal pain watching him sabotage himself yet again. It's hard not to notice that her evolution into a steadier, more grounded life coincides neatly with Jax's increasing agitation whenever her name comes up, as though her growth highlights his own stagnation. Then there is the enduring theory that their physical entanglement stretched far longer and far more consistently than anyone publicly admits. According to this interpretation, Kristen wasn't just a co-conspirator in chaos. She was the one person whose connection with Jax felt elemental. Stassi may have been the trophy, but Kristen was the lobster, the partner in crime whose toxicity synchronized effortlessly with his own. And if she did eventually cut off that arrangement, it would certainly explain Jax's perpetual intrusion into her dating life. The wounded pride of a man who thought he would always have access, only to learn he did not. Of course, the more cynical view is that Jax's affection has always been less about love and more about ownership. Declaring himself the moral superior, married, a father, a self-appointed king of his own narrative, allowed him to look down at Kristen from a pedestal he built himself. Yet for someone who claims to have moved on, he never seems able to tolerate her doing the same. Whatever the label, infatuation, dependence, territoriality, the through line is unmistakable. Jax has always been obsessed with Kristen. Whether she reciprocates on any meaningful level is debatable, but one thing is clear. Their bond, however dysfunctional, has shaped them more profoundly than most of the relationships that were supposed to matter. The real twist on this show isn't Sandoval's cheating. It's how effortlessly Ariana's entire cool girl past gets erased the moment the story needs a heroine. Ariana enters Vanderpump Rules as the self-anointed exception to the sorority of women around her, a cool girl straight out of the Gone Girl monologue, meticulously curating a persona built on male validation and disdain for anything coded as feminine. The posture is familiar, effortless, superior, allergic to emotional nuance, and remarkably effective at making other women look irrational simply by rolling her eyes in their direction. For several seasons, this performance is her entire brand. Her dynamic with the women is consistently brittle. Warmth goes to the men. Contempt is rationed out to the women, who are treated as though they've committed the sin of being openly emotional rather than theatrically above it all. The pattern is clear enough that the so-called cool girl comparison becomes less commentary and more closed captioning. Even her staunchest admirers admit the early persona is grating, an exhausting blend of moral superiorities and pick-me diplomacy. The irony, of course, is that the carefully maintained image requires its own collateral damage. Miami girl Kristen, and anyone else threatening the illusion of a perfect relationship, are swatted away with enough force to make them look unhinged. Meanwhile, the relationship she's protecting is already fractured, but protecting it serves the brand. The performative nonchalance turns out to be strenuous work. Later seasons hardly offer a redemption arc as much as a recalibration. Yes, her behavior softens in some areas, and yes, people began rooting for her. But that timeline also includes a stretch of baffling loyalty, defending a brother whose behavior was widely condemned, and deploying Sandoval as her enforcer. standing firmly behind James while his on-air conduct ranged from volatile to openly abusive. The evolution, then, is hardly linear. If anything, it's an illustration of how a cast member can oscillate between moral authority and strategic blindness depending on whose misconduct she's choosing to ignore. And then came Sandoval, the great narrative earthquake. When Sandoval finally faced consequences for years of unchecked behavior, not just for cheating, but for the exhausting pattern behind it, Ariana became the unexpected vessel for collective vindication. Viewers had watched woman after woman endure humiliation, while the men escaped with little more than a shrug. This time, the reckoning landed on the right doorstep. Supporting her felt less like rewarding past behavior, and more like finally seeing justice dispensed in a universe that rarely bothers. In the aftermath, Ariana executed a masterclass in survival optics, decisive PR, savvy career moves, and a public image refashioned into resilience incarnate. It was effective, remarkably so. Conveniently, much of her earlier conduct faded from memory beneath the glow of righteous heartbreak. Ariana was never the villain her detractors paint, nor the saint her supporters insist upon. She was, and remains, a complicated figure who spent years performing an aloof ideal while defending people and behaviors that made that ideal impossible to take seriously. Sandoval didn't rewrite her history, it merely changed the lighting. Here's what no one wants to admit about Stassi's Season 6 meltdown. The ignorance wasn't the insult, it was the resume. Stassi Schroeder's Season 6 meltdown over being called ignorant, as Ariana Madix calmly pointed out her track record of, well, ignorance, remains one of the show's more impressive feats of collective delusion. A trans woman was about to join Stassi's podcast, a platform already known for treating social issues with the nuance of a brick, and Ariana issued a simple, reasonable warning. Perhaps the resident Nazi chic enthusiast was not the undiscovered voice of marginalized advocacy. This alone should not have been controversial. Yet the cast performed an extraordinary routine of synchronized coddling, complete with Lisa Vanderpump herself, stepping in to massage the ego of a privileged white woman, rather than acknowledge why the word ignorant might have surfaced in the first place. It was an especially theatrical contradiction, given how recently Vanderpump had been touting her credentials as a fierce ally during Pride. Apparently, the allyship expired the moment someone's feelings were hurt. The irony is that Stassi's offense was not that the label was inaccurate. It was that Ariana refused to join the long line of women competing to flatter her. The so-called bullying consisted of Ariana declining to participate in the ritualized worship that often substituted for friendship in that group. Stassi, ever alert to an opportunity for performative victimhood, seized it with gusto. Tears flowed, sympathy poured in, and any conversation about the actual concerns, namely, the treatment of marginalized guests on a widely consumed platform, evaporated on contact with Stassi's self-pity. Historical context only amplifies the absurdity. This is the same woman who once described something as Nazi chic and seemed genuinely baffled that the world failed to applaud. Shockingly, this did not strengthen her case that she was simply misunderstood. Whether she has since learned anything is unknowable. What is clear is that she has become adept at curating which parts of herself the public is allowed to see. Selective transparency is a marvelous tool for anyone eager to avoid accountability. Ariana, meanwhile, demonstrated a level of consistency that the show often punished rather than praised. She confronted prejudice directly, whether addressing Stassi's rhetoric, challenging a homophobic pastor, or calling out mean girl posturing masquerading as innocence. Imperfect, yes, but reliably principled in a cast where principles frequently took long sabbaticals. Stassi, by contrast, remained a study in conditional decency, capable of loyalty when convenient, self-serving when not, and tirelessly committed to casting herself as the injured party even while leaving a trail of offenses that required industrial-strength excuses. The Season 6 saga stands as the clearest example of her preferred narrative, one where accountability is persecution, criticism is cruelty, and tears are a get-out-of-reflection free card. The episode did not reveal anything new about Stassi. It simply removed the protective gloss long applied in editing. The result was a portrait of someone desperate to be seen as a victim at the precise moments when she most definitively was not. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Tom Sandoval might be reality TV's greatest unintentional parody. Tom Sandoval embodies a very specific Hollywood tragedy, the relentless hunger for fame unaccompanied by even a whisper of talent. The spectacle of watching someone work so hard and achieve so little would almost be inspiring if it weren't so unintentionally comedic. Confidence he has in abundance. Ability, unfortunately, never bothered to show up. There's an ironic comfort in remembering that true talent without access is a far crueler fate. Plenty of gifted performers never land the elusive break, while Sandoval, armed with bluster, bravado, and a trumpet apparently tuned by a cartoon sound designer, somehow stumbled onto a television show. If ambition alone could power a career, he'd be unstoppable. Of course, he's hardly alone. The entertainment industry is filled with individuals who manage to scale its rickety ladder despite possessing only the faintest relationship with talent. It's not impossible. It's simply baffling to watch it happen in real time. Only James Kennedy ever seemed to possess genuine star potential, though even his creative output appears trapped in a time capsule. His music still echoes the aesthetic of 2018, as if evolution were an optional feature. And that, naturally, is the essence of Vanderpump Rules, an ensemble of aspiring stars who would have long since graduated to bigger stages if any of them had been truly exceptional. Instead, the show thrives on their Sisyphean quest for relevance, a quest better suited for reality television than actual stardom. Sandoval's role, in particular, borders on performance art. His failures unfold with such precise, almost theatrical absurdity that one could reasonably suspect a ghostwriter behind the persona, someone crafting a brilliantly exaggerated caricature of the hopelessly self-deluded. The infamous trumpet scene remains the defining exhibit, a moment so tonally perfect in its awfulness that it strains belief to imagine anyone hearing it and declaring it good. The line between genuine delusion and scripted satire has rarely felt thinner. If this is authenticity, it's astonishing. If it's an act, it's genius. Either way, the result is the same: a man chasing fame with unwavering conviction, talent forever out of reach, and the audience left marveling at the spectacle. Never trust the boys' version of events. This is the same group that can turn "We Hung Out a Little" into a full-blown national scandal. The episode unfolds like a cosmic prank, as if the universe tossed the cast into a blender and selected the puree setting. Chaos reigns, continuity evaporates, and yet every disastrous moment fits each participant with unnerving precision. Shiana remains fully committed to her personal myth-making, drifting through scenes as though starring in a heartfelt Lifetime drama, while the rest of the world endures a psychological thriller. Her devotion to Rob borders on religious. She speaks of him as though he pioneered the concept of loyalty, despite the man barely feigning interest in her existence. Meanwhile, Jax and his Reiki practitioner deliver one of the most excruciatingly awkward displays ever committed to television. His version of healing involves ogling the woman with the same hunger usually reserved for fried appetizers. Expecting self-improvement from him is akin to mopping a floor while wearing muddy boots, the performance of progress with absolutely none of the results. Then comes the attempted emotional moment between Schwartz and Katie, an ordeal in its own right. Katie offers genuine vulnerability, and Schwartz responds like a device stuck at 2% battery and freezing. His emotional bandwidth mysteriously expands only when comforting Sandoval. In those cases, he transforms into a bereaved Victorian widow, theatrically cradling his friend with a tenderness his own wife never receives. Katie is granted little more than a knee pat and a dissociative stare. Inevitably, the James and Kristen vortex opens. James, ever desperate for male validation, treats rumors of intimacy with Kristen as though they were Olympic achievements. He yearns for high fives with such transparent eagerness, it becomes painful to witness. Kristen, naturally, hobbles into frame with a broken foot, her annual migration into yet another cheating scandal, seasonal and predictable. Fortune may not favor her, but fractures apparently do. Rachel lingers at the edges, speaking in her characteristic tranquil monotone capable of sedating an entire metropolitan area. She delivers commentary with a soft, passive bewilderment, her perpetually updated face presenting the same unoccupied expression. Renovations occur, yet the electricity remains off. Stassi, champion of the self-branded fierce, no-nonsense persona, spends her time debasing herself over Patrick, a man radiating the smug glow of someone who Googles a topic moments before lecturing women about it. His energy suggests he delivers unsolicited TED Talks in domestic settings. The dynamic is almost as pitiable as Shiana's devotion to Rob, which is an achievement of its own. Then there is the sticky emotional gum that is Brittany and Jax. He returns to his favorite narcissistic monologue, declaring himself a monster so she can reaffirm her devotion under the fluorescent lighting of televised humiliation. It's a predictable cycle, typically followed by Lisa arriving to defend yet another misbehaving man, as though auditioning for the role of their benevolent owner, when not actively kissing an actual dog on the mouth. The entire episode is a fever dream that demands sedation, carbohydrates, and possibly spiritual intervention. And yet, upon rewatch with functional cognition, an unsettling truth emerges. James, for once, is not the villain. He explicitly denied sleeping with Kristen. When asked if he hung out with her, he replied, accurately, "A little bit." It appears the men either misheard, were intoxicated, or were encouraged by production to escalate a non-event into a scandal. Their collective embellishment morphed a mundane interaction into tabloid-level hysteria, with Jax sprinting toward misinformation as though it were an Olympic sport. James, usually guilty by default, ends up surprisingly innocent in this specific disaster. As for Schwartz, his emotional hierarchy remains baffling. He has wept with operatic intensity over the possibility of Sandoval being uninvited from Jax's wedding, 45 minutes of marathon sorrow, yet offered Katie only the most meager flicker of feeling at their own. Even years later, bloated and melancholy on a separate reality show, he expresses more grief over traveling without Sandoval than over the dissolution of his marriage. In a universe governed by logic, such priorities would be inexplicable. In this universe, they are simply the plot. Stop pretending the problem is you not learning their names. It's the show. No one stands out. The latest Vanderpump Rules spin-off arrives with all the force of a forgettable dream, one of those hazy, indistinguishable episodes where the only lingering memory is that someone, somewhere, had long red hair. Blame it on gummies, blame it on sobriety, blame it on the laws of time and space. The outcome is the same. The episode evaporates instantly. Faces blur, names refuse to stick, and the cast glides by like an overexposed group photo. Granted, new ensembles always require a grace period. Even the most recognizable Bravo-lebrities once occupied the great blur, that time when Lisa Vanderpump could be mistaken for Meredith Marks without so much as a second thought. But this reboot seems determined to make that adjustment window as disorienting as possible. The editing barrels ahead with frantic jigsaw puzzle energy, scenes chopped, rearranged, and shoved at the viewer as if sheer velocity might generate interest. Instead, it produces the narrative equivalent of jet lag. Meanwhile, the cast is being shoved toward instant icon status, whether they're prepared for it or not. Viewers are asked to invest immediately, deeply, and without evidence. Exhibit A, the singer recording a song no one needed, and producers clearly regretted attending. Her storyline appears glued on, rather than grown from anything resembling a life. Exhibit B, the Jersey boys surfing, poorly. Their insistence that New Jersey waves are superior is adorable in the way delusion often is, but it does little to distract from the fact that Southern California is the surfing capital of the mainland, and these men are not exactly its ambassadors. And then there's the would-be Casanova, who steals drinks and assumes universal desirability. His spiritual predecessor, Jax Taylor, ultimately unraveled into a fully documented cautionary tale. But in the beginning, he possessed enough charisma and chaos to fuel a franchise. This new contender has none of the magnetism, just the misplaced confidence. The larger issue is not that the cast is unlikable. Unlikable has built empires. It's that no one stands out. They merge into a beige mass of interchangeable personalities while the show frantically insists they're riveting. In its rush to recreate lightning in a bottle, the series shakes the bottle so violently that nothing inside takes shape. The result? Too many storylines, too little coherence, and no breakout star to anchor the chaos. Perhaps, with time, the fog will lift and individual identities will sharpen. There is, admittedly, potential, particularly in the delicious promise of future mess. But for now, the show feels like a puzzle dumped on the table with half the pieces upside down, all urgency and no structure. Here's what no one admits about Jax Taylor. His entire persona collapses the moment someone refuses to be intimidated. Charlie's Season 8 reunion showdown with Jax functions as a rare moment of balance in a season otherwise dominated by his favorite mantra, the divine right of the groom. Watching her dismantle his bluster with calm precision is almost medicinal after enduring months of, "It's my wedding, I can do whatever I want" theatrics. Her refusal to cower, paired with the faint delight she clearly takes in puncturing his ego, lands with the exact force the season had been starving for. Brittany's response, however, supplies its own unintended comedy, declaring she had never met anyone so disrespectful while seated beside a man who has methodically disrespected every cast member, including her repeatedly, is a level of irony that almost demands its own chyron. Season 8 has a way of peeling back the veneer, and her wide-eyed indignation is among its more grating revelations. Charlie's boast about being the youngest, but definitely not the dumbest, lands as one of the few lines of the reunion that actually earns its applause. The sight of Jax and Brittany blinking in bewildered outrage, unable to weaponize their usual intimidation tactics through a screen, is entertainment in its purest form. Even Andy's attempt to soften her critique felt oddly tone-deaf. Audiences were more than willing to let the call-out stand unedited. What makes the moment even sharper is how accustomed Jax is to leaning on physical presence as a form of dominance, a habit only enhanced by the rumored shoe lifts. Confronted by someone both unimpressed and physically out of reach, his usual arsenal evaporates. The dynamic shifts, and Charlie, petite or not, becomes the only heavyweight in the exchange. Her tenure on the show may have been brief, but Season 8 proves she had no trouble calling out nonsense wherever she found it. Stepping away from the ongoing reality TV wreckage was both wise and, frankly, disappointing. Because there are few things more satisfying than watching someone unbothered, articulate, and razor-sharp dismantle a man who has built an entire persona on never being challenged. Here's the twist: the villains weren't wrong. They were early. The least beloved personalities of the cast have an inconvenient habit of being right, which is perhaps why no one enjoys hearing from them. Shiana, for instance, labeled Tom a narcissist while speaking to Ariana's mother, a diagnosis that aged with startling accuracy. She also identified the reason behind Katie's volcanic temper and escalating drinking before the wedding, a subconscious awareness that she was marching toward a marriage she had no business entering. Her insight was, of course, delivered while she herself had already made out with Schwartz, but clairvoyance is rarely tidy. Jax, patron saint of accidental truth-telling, predicted that Shay and Shiana's marriage had a shorter shelf life than the dairy in his refrigerator. He also repeatedly insisted that Katie and Tom should never wed, a point the universe later confirmed with gusto. His talent for identifying everyone else's mess, particularly Sheena's, was as consistent as it was unwelcome. Lala, another frequent target of collective irritation, delivered her own prophecies with unnerving precision. She warned that Rachel was headed straight for a meltdown and flatly stated she wouldn't trust Rachel around her man while drinking. Both assessments proved less predictions and more spoilers. Yet when labeled a whore, after endlessly trumpeting the material perks earned through a particular set of intimate skills, she reacted with theatrical outrage. The moral high ground becomes slippery when one spends entire confessionals celebrating a transactional sex life. If one is going to boast, one might at least embrace the logical vocabulary. Kristen, never celebrated for her subtlety, also deserves credit for calling both Ariana and James' trajectories before they fully detonated. She pointed out James's destructive, alcohol-fueled cycle, abusive behavior included, long before the group acknowledged it. Her infamous "You win" speech to Ariana in Season 2 reads less like bitterness in retrospect and more like premature vindication. Even James, chaos embodied, occasionally landed on the truth. His refusal to join the Tom and Jax Little Boys Club allowed him to identify its dysfunction with unusual clarity, though his own personality offered little moral high ground from which to deliver such observations. In short, the show's most criticized figures, messy, reactive, and chronically irritating, function as accidental oracles. They may wreak havoc, but they also read each other with unnerving accuracy. The future, apparently, belongs to the cast members no one wants to listen to. Here's the uncomfortable truth no one wants to admit about James Kennedy's dating history. James Kennedy's romantic appeal has long been one of Vanderpump Rules' great mysteries, an enigma wrapped in a British accent that, contrary to popular fantasy, is hardly the Queen's English. Even before the public documentation of his cruelty and volatility, his charm was elusive. The attitude was abrasive, the voice grating, and the looks, while serviceable, were hardly a once-in-a-generation sighting in Los Angeles. Yet women gravitated toward him. The question is why. The most practical explanation is also the least glamorous. Proximity to James meant proximity to the cameras. Aligning oneself with him offered a fast-tracked pathway into the show's ecosystem. Girlfriend status, then friend of, and, with luck, full-fledged cast member. For some, the potential for screen time apparently outweighed the inconvenience of dating someone who treated women with open contempt. Of course, there were additional perks. He was tall. He had a striking jawline. His energy, chaotic though it was, could come off as charisma to those willing to squint. Several women have described being around him as a fun, wild ride, the kind of kinetic unpredictability that makes for entertaining nights out and even more entertaining television. And to his credit, he delivered genuinely funny moments. The infamous fine china meltdown and the legendary 151 in the eye scene have achieved near mythical status among viewers. But none of that masks the reality that the personality underneath was consistently appalling. The childishness, the self-importance, the sneering cruelty, even toward his friends, rendered him repellent long before the worst incidents came to light. It remains astonishing that Lisa Vanderpump continued to advocate for him after he aimed Guido's vicious messages at her own son. The result is a portrait of a man whose appeal rested not on sincerity or charm, but on spectacle. Some women may have been chasing excitement, others, exposure. In any case, the pattern suggests that the allurer was never James himself, but the chaotic orbit he provided. Whether Allie joined that orbit for affection or airtime is open to interpretation, but the incentives were certainly visible.